On this week's episode of Amari Purple Talk, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction reactions, who says a funk band can't play rock, the Purple Spotlight on Jill Jones, and more. Amari Purple Talk starts now. Welcome to episode 21 of Amari Purple Talk, a Prince podcast where I share my thoughts on the Prince musical Singularity. I'm Richard Cole, your imagination funk soloist, and I want to start by thanking everyone that has tuned in. I hope you're enjoying the show. Please leave your comments on the show where comments are displayed. Please continue to download and listen from your favorite podcast platform. And YouTube listeners, please continue to like and subscribe. Feel free to also visit my website, www.amaricommunications.com. You may also click the links in the show notes to follow me on social media and submit topics or questions for use in future episodes and purchase Amari Purple Talk merchandise. And with that out of the way, let's start with our first topic. And our first topic today is, will we see a Purple Rain 4K release update? All right, so a couple of episodes ago, we put forth the question of, will we ever see Purple Rain get a 4K release? Now, it's already available on DVD as well as Blu-ray, but kind of over the last several months or so, there's been a little bit of a panic on the movie side of things, where there was a threat of physical media disappearing. Well, earlier this week, there was an announcement made by Universal and Warner Brothers. So they are going to conduct a joint venture. And this will be a joint venture for home entertainment. This will be a North American 10-year joint venture regarding home entertainment releases. Separate from that deal, both studios are committing to license each other's disc products in certain offshore markets as well. So basically what this comes down to is that through a domestic joint venture, this is also subject to government regulation approval, but they will distribute Blu-ray, DVD, and 4K UHD for new releases, library titles, and television content within the United States and Canada. And this will combine sales, retail marketing, and distribution opportunities for both major studios. And both Universal and Warner Brothers, they will be involved in this new partnership. This will be presided over by an industry veteran by the name of Eddie Cunningham. So basically what this means is that at least for the next 10 years, Universal and Warner Brothers, they will still be involved in the manufacturing and distribution of both of their respective movie and television catalogs. Also, too, why this is important for Prince aficionados, again, like I said, we brought up the question of, will we ever see a 4K release of Purple Rain? So this type of a joint venture will definitely open the doors for something like that happening. And if you remember the title of a couple of episodes ago, where this topic was not limited to Purple Rain, but including the films of Under the Cherry Moon, Graffiti Bridge, and, well, heck, even, I know Batman has received a 4K release recently, and it is also available as well on DVD and Blu-ray. But significantly, like I said, Purple Rain, Under the Cherry Moon, and Graffiti Bridge, at least, that opens the door for future 4K releases. Now, for Under the Cherry Moon and Graffiti Bridge, like I said, they weren't major blockbusters. Both one barely probably broke even, the other was considered a total flop at the box office. However, in the case of Warner Brothers, they do have a subsidiary which is titled Warner Archive, and that division handles re-releases of, say, classic or more classic library material, as well as cult films, which Under the Cherry Moon and Graffiti Bridge would be definitely relegated to that title as a cult release. Purple Rain, on the other hand, it was recently inducted to the National Film Archive for preservation, so that is considered a motion picture that has had at least some cultural impact, as well as financial success for the period that it was released. So again, this is good news for Prince fans. This is also good news for movie fans, because also on this show we talk about often physical media versus streaming, and I'm sort of a fan of both. I do enjoy my physical media, especially in the case of vinyl records and CDs. I am a liner note junkie. So with that being said, when it comes to films too, pretty much I'm not like a huge film buff, but I do enjoy films, both commercial. There are some cult classics, classics in general. I kind of studied more music, photography, a little bit of video production. But I haven't spent a lot of time, say, like in film school or film studies or film history. But I am interested in the history of film to a certain degree. So owning certain classic titles or certain cult titles, certain genres of film, I'm a fan of. But as far as being a Prince fan, at least on the major motion picture level, then we will have long-lasting physical media or opportunities for reissue for physical media. So this is something I'm definitely looking forward to, as well as to what other films that both Universal and Warner's are going to release, either in Blu-ray or 4K format from now and for the next 20 years. Now, this deal will take effect in 2021. So, like I said, from those 10 years, looking forward to adding some more films to my archive there, and as well as Prince releases as well. And of course, again, as far as unreleased music videos or compilations of music videos, concert films, and things of that nature, of course, the Prince estate still has full control over those items, and whether those materials will eventually be released by Sony. I'm not sure what their game plan is, but probably news of this nature will probably force them to compete and try to find a new way of manufacturing and distributing as well, to kind of keep the pace as well. So who knows? Looking forward to seeing what develops on that side as well. So, but as far as, again, maybe seeing a 4K release of Purple Rain or a 4K release of Under the Cherry Moon or Graffiti Bridge, be some nice things to have to your collection. So most important is, what do you think? Leave a comment and let me know. Are you a fan of this news? Are you a film collector as well as a music collector? Let me know if you're excited about this. Does it make a difference one way or the other? But with that, we're going to end this topic, and we're going to move on to another topic. I meant to add this into the show notes, so it won't appear in the show notes, but this was definitely a main topic, which is a continuation of last week's topic regarding the Camille album. So last week, Camille was our Bite the Boots segment, and basically it's just a recommendation of materials that may be circulating either as bootlegs or unreleased things that are still in the vault, or things that are out of print that weren't maybe officially released albums. But the question was, would you rather have Camille as a standalone CD/vinyl release, or would you prefer those tracks or those mixes? Actually, everything has been pretty much released in some way, shape, or form other than one song, which is Rebirth of the Flesh. So would you prefer to have those alternate mixes available on a Sign of the Times Deluxe? So that ended up being our question of the week. And I put up a poll on Twitter, and these are the results of that poll. So again, the question was, would you like the Camille album as a standalone CD or vinyl, or just have the tracks on the Sign of the Times Deluxe edition? And this week's results, surprisingly, it's a tie. So 50-50 down the middle, Camille versus Sign of the Times. I did notice a lot of comments on Facebook as well as Twitter as well regarding the poll. And yeah, there's a lot of support for just having it as a standalone release, and then a lot of people that really wanted both, and maybe a few that, just wanted the tracks just on the Sign of the Times Deluxe. I'm pretty much of the mindset of having both, but last week I was definitely leaning towards having this either as like a limited release, maybe a record store day release on vinyl. And like I said, I'm a liner note junkie, so it's cool to have the tracks on a Sign of the Times Deluxe, because you would still have those liner notes that would give it the historical context. There's a lot of people that also put forth the opinion of just, those songs are, except for one, in one way, shape, or form still available, and just making a nice playlist. And that's a good idea too, which I already sort of have that. Made my own sort of Camille album, on a CD. But I don't have any artwork for it or, liner notes or anything like that. And like I said, I'm a liner note junkie. But, sometimes it's just cool to have just the single CD of something. And like I said, a good set of liner notes puts it in a historical context. And you could do both. You can put the tracks, maybe come out with the Sign of the Times Deluxe set, and then maybe down the line just do a single CD. Because there are some people that don't necessarily need to have every, all the box sets, or people just prefer a single CD of something. And, that sequence of songs with, Rebirth of the Flesh, If I Was Your Girlfriend, Strange Relationship, Rock Hard in a Funky Place, Good Love, Shockadelica, Fill You Up. That's a pretty good sequence of songs, and sometimes you just want just a good listen. You just want to hear a good 6 or 7 tracks of something, or just a single CD of something, at a, any given point of the day or evening. and just enjoy it on that level, and then you just move on to something else, maybe some television, or maybe you're heading out someplace, or or something to get you up in the morning or something. You don't have time to really engulf yourself with a series of CDs, so to speak. So I mean, there's a pretty good argument for that, but like I said, I'm leaning more towards the idea of the single release. And of course, obviously, the tracks would be on a super deluxe edition of Sign of the Times anyway. I mean, and then two, there's another argument said for the original track configuration for that 1986 version of Crystal Ball, because originally this was supposed to be a 3 LP set. But Warner Brothers made Prince whittle it down to 2 albums, which became the Sign of the Times album that we all know and love, and which is my favorite Prince album anyway. So that's it in a nutshell. So this is the first poll on Amari Purple Talk to be split completely down the middle on that, and that's pretty fascinating. So who knows? Again, we've put forth the question in previous episodes: would a Sign of the Times Super Deluxe be a swing for the fences final release for Warner Brothers, since after 2021 all they're going to be able to release are the movie soundtracks, Purple Rain and Parade and things of that nature? Or would Sony maybe within a year or two put out the Super Deluxe? But who knows? Let's wait and see. But again, are there some of you out there that did not have a chance to participate in the poll? Hey, let me know in the comments. Let me know on social media what your preference would be. Do you like that configuration of tracks for the Camille album? Or you just want everything in a super deluxe edition of Sign of the Times? Leave a comment below and let me know. And we're going to end that topic, and we're going to move to our next topic. And our next topic is the 2020 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees. This will be a brief, and if you look at the show notes, brief, with the quotation marks there, brief commentary. All right, so here we go. So this week, the final votes were in, and we now have our 2020 inductions for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I know I voted. I voted for Notorious B.I.G. I voted for Rufus and Shaka Khan. I voted for Pat Benatar. I voted for T-Rex. And I voted for the Doobie Brothers. All right. So this is going to get into some heavy territory. And probably most Prince fans are wondering why this is a topic. Prince is already inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so who cares? Well, boys and girls, this all started with my suggestion, which was influenced by a 2013 Facebook post by Jesse Johnson, just putting forth the suggestion that, hey, why can't the Time be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Because they were influential, and like I said, it really just depends on where either you were between 1981 and 1984, or when you became a Prince fan, and basically a group like the Time, from your point of view, might be just a footnote. But they were very influential in a lot of ways, and for the most part, the majority of members also had a measure of success that has had an influence on whether it was pop music or R&B, or maybe even rock to a certain degree as well. So I've done one episode of Amari Purple Talk as well as a special edition campaigning for the time to be inducted in 2021. And most of the support was overwhelmingly positive. There were a few detractors, basically on the argument that Prince did everything and Prince is already in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But if you seek out the Amari Purple Talk special for the time campaigning to be, or the time being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, then what I did was go over a brief history of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame itself and the numerous categories in which the time, whether it's just the original 7 members or any member past or current lineup, is eligible for consideration into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, regardless of what you think Prince did or didn't do. And there's also a lot of controversy, no pun intended, folks, but there's a lot of controversy just about every year with the nominations, with the artists that actually get in to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So basically, when this set of nominations were announced, or I should say inductees were announced, I thought I'd lend a little bit of commentary to it. All right, so these are the inductees for the class of 2020. And first and foremost, there's Whitney Houston. She's been actually eligible since 2010. And as a side note, eligibility in the what they call the performers category, which I really think they should change it to the legends category at this stage. But basically, to be considered for eligibility, you are eligible 25 years after your first record was released, regardless of what it did on the charts or whatever. But whenever your first album was, 25 years later, you are eligible for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that being said, so we have Whitney Houston that is in this class of 2020. We also have Depeche Mode. We have the Doobie Brothers. We have 9 Inch Nails. We have the Notorious B.I.G. and T-Rex. So they made a cut, or they made the cut out of a group of 16 nominees that were announced in October. And like I said, 2 of those 16 that I voted for, Rufus and Shaka Khan and Pat Benatar. So, like I said, again, if you listen to the Amari Purple Talk special regarding the time and my arguments for having them included, as I said, I was going over the history of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And like I said, there's a lot of controversy every year. So this is what this particular commentary for this week is going to be. There's a lot of argument back and forth depending on where you're sitting. First and foremost, we're going to start with this thing called rock and roll. Now, basically, what rock and roll was, it was a sort of a rhythm and blues euphemism. So, back then, you just, unlike songs of today, you just couldn't blatantly say sex or anything on a record, So basically, rock and roll was a euphemism for sex. Now, as far as the genre that's called rock and roll, of course, we know who our architects are: Little Richard, Chuck Berry, You got, Louis Jordan, and, people that are the first class of Rock and Roll Hall of Famers. You have Bill Haley, you have Elvis, but also too, you have James Brown, you have Ray Charles. But all of what rock and roll was is basically, or what it ended up being, is sort of a mixture of rhythm and blues elements, some country elements, gospel elements, bluegrass, kind of what I guess what they called Elvis doing it first was rockabilly, because it was sort of kind of taking that rock and roll, but he kind of started putting sort of the more country elements into the mixture of it. But, no different than what, or Chuck Berry was sort of more the architect, I should say, of that kind of a mixture. But Chuck Berry is bona fide rock and roll. There's no rockabilly about it. And over the years, kind of starting with the Beatles more so, but definitely as you got into the later 60s, as you got into the 70s, there sort of became this sort of, unofficial segregation of rock music or whatever was popular. And so you have this sort of, what I call sort of this like elitist bunch, that calls it classic rock, where whatever was happening in the late 60s and early 70s, and depending on where you're sitting, up until the late 70s or even the early 80s, that this is what rock and roll is. Never mind its roots so much. Never mind what other, I should say, ethnicity is performing in that genre. Because basically, as much as we love and adore Prince, there are probably some sort of classic rock aficionados that would never consider him as a classic in one way, shape, or form. They'll probably give you a little backhanded compliment regarding Purple Rain, but never really diving into, say, his complete body of work. So, so there are the occasional inductees, like a Whitney Houston, like a Janet Jackson, or let's go completely to the left, even the Monkees, are not considered rock and roll so much. And other, say, more R&B type groups. But, let's rewind that clock back a little bit. Because before 1955 or 56, pop music was what it was. And, you had, for every Frank Sinatra or Dean Martin record, you had stuff that was like, how much is that doggy in the window, that was popular, or, a Miles Davis album, probably once ruled the pop charts at some particular point in time. It's just that kind of right around the 60s, all of that was looped under rock music, So, of course, the obvious, like I said, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Elvis, Buddy Holly, the Everly Brothers, James Brown, in the beginning. That's your rock and roll. Now, as you get into the early 60s, you had the Shirelles, there'd be no Supremes, there'd be no Destiny's Child, there'd be no, In Vogue or anything had it not been for the Shirelles. And there's a point I'm going to make about this in just a second, but the long and short of it is, on that end, there's controversy. So basically, I'm really trying to struggle with the influence of Whitney Houston other than probably the most significant pop artist. Now, did she have an influence on what we think about as rock and roll, or are we noting her significance? And I'm going to give it a definition of traditionalist, because doo-wop groups, whether they were black or white, so whether you're talking about, say, the Coasters or the Drifters, or even, say, was it Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons? That's not really guitar heavy rock and roll. That's just those are strictly vocal groups. But that was considered rock and roll of its time. Aretha Franklin, deservedly so, in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's at a point, where you were having an Aretha Franklin rock the Fillmore, and maybe, not necessarily this was the case, but with other artists, this was the case. You might have had a Miles Davis and then the Grateful Dead on the same bill, or something. But, definitely an Aretha Franklin had a definite effect on a Janis Joplin. So, there's influence in that particular realm. So, if we're acknowledging Whitney Houston in the sort of traditional sense of vocal ability, then definitely. But like I said, there was never anything that was sort of what people consider as rock and roll. There was nothing guitar heavy, or there's not the stereotype of rock and roll that's a part of it. And, again, like I said, the Prince argument regarding the time, again, it's like, well, Prince did everything. Well, let's look at it this way, too. Whitney Houston didn't write any of her own songs. She never played an instrument. Like I said, her voice was her instrument, and a pretty damn good instrument that it was. But like I said, are we acknowledging it in the traditional sense? Because that voice can rock a house, could rock a house, but just not in a musical genre sort of a way. Because everything was sort of crafted with pop sensibilities. A lot of her tracks were, there's very little that maybe kind of later, there were more R&B, more soul infused into it. But the overall image that was presented was that of pop. And, the other elephant in the room is the importance of hip hop. And again, all music is subjective, so music that you may like, I may not like. Music that I like, you may not like. And that's okay. It's like, this show isn't about forcing agendas onto people as far as what your musical taste should be, and vice versa. But, hip hop basically is that sort of edginess that rock and roll in the 50s and 60s used to have. By the 70s, it sort of got to a place of, whether you're talking concept albums on a certain level, you also had the dominance of FM radio coming into play. And then that was something else that started dividing the lines, started segregating the music once again, where at a certain point that music was a cultural exchange of ideas, which definitely the 60s were. You had Motown bringing what it brought to the table, and then you would have, the Beatles or the Stones, you would have even, Jimi Hendrix that was, sort of great at building those bridges. At one point, yeah, again, we all didn't get it, but in England they got it. And then it kind of took a while. And I think for a lot of us in the 70s, in the black communities, we just started to get Jimi Hendrix. By then it was too late, but we got it. We understood what was happening because Funkadelic got it. They understood it. George Clinton understood it. But again, hip hop, again, yes, we do have Public Enemy that's in there. We do have NWA that's in there. And we now have the Notorious B.I.G. that's in there. But, KRS-One should be in there, and Rakim should be in there as well. And again, like I said, hip-hop is that element because it was edgy music. It came out of left field just like rock and roll came out of left field. It brought everybody to the table. We, as black people, we created the form, but the statistics also show, even on a global scale, that, white people buy more hip hop than, the rest of us combined. So, you have detractors on that end of it too. Like, well, hip hop shouldn't be included in that. And the bottom line from 1956, 57, I guess whenever Alan Freed decided to coin the phrase rock and roll, to whatever, maybe the end of disco or whatever in the 70s, to a certain point, it was all considered rock and roll. Whoever was on Ed Sullivan, up until about mid 60s, late 60s, again, you sort of had this label of soul music, but up until late 60s, it was, if you were on Ed Sullivan, you were considered a rock act, whether you were the Temptations or the Supremes, you were on Ed Sullivan, you were American Bandstand, is what the kids were dancing to. And to the older generations, it was all rock and roll. It didn't matter, what the color was of the person singing it. It was all considered rock and roll, or it was all considered noise, to the older generations. And, rock and roll just happened to break down so many barriers. Or I'll put it this way, the Beatles, or the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds album, but those sounds, they infused so much art into the rock and roll that it started appealing to the masses. So the kids were buying it, the grown-ups were buying it, your grandparents were into it, then it's like, oh, well, it's okay. And then as more and more art, whether it was Rush or whether it was David Bowie, on one hand, it started becoming this high art. Pink Floyd, it started becoming this high art. Where, say, Led Zeppelin and the Who, they were just out to make the loudest, rockinest, bluesiest records out there, and the Stones, once they stopped chasing the Beatles, it was like, well, we're going to make the rockinest records we could make. And again, like I said, with corporations and record companies, then that segregation started coming in. It was always there. But probably the true golden age of rock and roll after the 1950s was that period with the Shirelles, the Drifters, where those, I know like with the Drifters and the Coasters, those songs were written by Jerry Lieber and Mike Stroller. two Jewish guys that were writing blues records. You know, Big Mama Thornton's Hound Dog was the first, and to me the best. Now, I don't have anything against Elvis's version of Hound Dog, but just listen to his version and listen to the original version by Big Mama Thornton. Get back to me. But they started off writing, you know, black music for black artists. And then they got the job through Hound Dog being such a success, getting the job with Elvis. But by 1960, they were, you know, had hits with the Coasters, and then they were writing for and producing the Drifters, and then Benny King. And then you also had, working out of New York in the Brill Building, where Lieber and Stroller were also writing, you also had Carole King and Jerry Goffin, who were writing the songs for the Shirelles. You also had Phil Spector and that whole thing with the Ronettes and Righteous Brothers. But he wrote and produced a lot of black artists as well. And just through that sort of, you know, coming together on that level, that the music was reaching everyone. You know, they sort of set that template, you know, where they were reaching a people. You know, because if you play, you know, something like Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow, Under the Boardwalk, you know, Benny King, Stand By Me, that's embraced equally by the masses. You know, it's like you even to this day don't consider, oh, well, this is an R&B song or this is a pop song. It's just good. It was just good music. And as much of a Beatles fan as I am, the fault to me, it's not like Elvis where you had his manager, the Colonel, being greedy and sort of like trying to, you know, stealing the publishing from a lot of people and trying to put Elvis's name on it. Regardless of whether you liked him or not, he still enabled that. So, you know, that's sort of a bit of my problem with Elvis on that level, is that he enabled that. He allowed it. It was like he didn't turn the checks away or whatever, you know, when he was competing with Jackie Wilson or whoever. But with the Beatles, they were writing their own songs, and they did give credit where credit was due, you know. So when the British artists started coming over, where America was trying to write off Chuck Berry and trying to write off Little Richard, you know, they were the ones like, no, that's the music that we like, you know, or, you know, what kind of also helped kick open the doors for Motown with them saying, oh, well, we love the Motown groups as well. But the companies, you know, who was benefiting? It's like they said the Beatles saved rock and roll, but who did they save it from? And like I said, I don't necessarily fault them, or I don't fault the Stones to a degree, but the record companies, again, you know, I don't think radio so much, but definitely, you know, the record companies were definitely sort of pushing that agenda to by the time you got to the 70s and sort of these corporate takeovers of radio stations and record companies, they were no longer grabbing people as a collective. It was grabbing people as a demographic. So then it becomes this label of this is soul, this is rock, this is blues, this is jazz, this is whatever. And we're going to market it to whatever demographic we feel is going to bring us the most dollars, so to speak. So this is where we are when we talk about the controversies of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So it's your individual listener, you know, you guys out here listening to the podcast, myself included, we're about music. You know, it doesn't matter what color the artist is or, how old the genre is. I have jazz, I've got blues, I love reggae, but yeah, at heart, for me, it's just, it's the funk. When I want to make a record, I want it to be the hardest, funkiest record. Whether I succeed or not is a different story, but that's my mindset going in. But I love all types of music, though. There was a documentary, Ken Burns documentary on country music that was out this past fall, and I enjoyed it. It gave me a deeper appreciation of country music. Not that I'll still go out and buy a lot of it, but it broadened my horizons to where I have a better appreciation of it. So, and there's a whole historical context there too. Another cultural, there's like this subgenre of the South, or subculture of the South way back when, where that was the only cultural exchange, was the music. There was just as much black folks listening to country music as much as white folks were digging the blues and whatever was going on in the, whether it was the 20s or the 30s or the 40s or 50s, So there's a healing power to music that, like I said, it should really just eliminate these boundaries. But anyway, I've really digressed. But like I said, I've had a lot to say about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in this regard, is that it's really sort of this elitist trip that really blocks, say, not only my favorite artists, but some of your favorite artists as well, because there's all these politics and there's this idea of what rock should be, or these people that think they have an idea of what rock is or what rock was. And basically what they're doing, especially now that I don't know how long this thing has been televised for the masses. I do know for a while that it was on VH1, especially when that year that Prince was inducted. VH1 was doing the broadcast. And then over the last few years, HBO has been broadcasting it. So a lot of these inductions are based on how many tickets they can sell for the big dinner, for the ceremony itself, which includes a big meal or whatever. And also the television ratings. So if you nominate the names, like, oh, well, yeah, they're going to tune in because Whitney Houston's nominated. Not for so much as whether or not she really does belong there, or whoever, or, like, I can get a group like Depeche Mode. They were influential in their genre. Like I said, I did vote for T-Rex, so that band, Mark Bolan, was definitely, influential in that genre. But, to leave out Rufus and Shaka Khan, again, go seek out those, well, maybe not, there's not the first four, but check out anything from, Rags to Rufus to Ask Rufus. There's Rufusized, and then, there's also, Rufus and Shaka Khan album. Those 4 albums back to back, listen to those, and then again, come back and get me. And then, Pat Benatar, as far as you're trying to make a statement as far as having more women included into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Granted, like I said, Aretha's already there. That's cool and everything. But there's been this noise over the last few years about, letting women into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. More inductees, I should say. But, they're going for these sort of these controversial choices, when there's so many of the obvious choices you should just let in first and then deal with, whoever afterward. Like I said, Rufus and Shaka Khan should be in there, because what they were doing in the 70s. That was influential. And again, that was, she wasn't just, she wasn't chasing Aretha Franklin. That band had their own style and funk, and, there was some good rock guitar, and especially the earlier albums. But I mean, great musicianship, a great live ensemble. That was what was normal. It was no different than, say, what the Doobie Brothers were doing in, during that 70s period. And it's good that they're in as well. But in Depeche Mode, Nine Inch Nails, great choices. But to leave out, I would say, a Pat Benatar, to leave that, to leave her out, to me, that was one, when you look back, granted, there was, there was Blondie, but that was, again, a female lead singer with the band, but they were considered the band. It was just so happens she was just the lead singer. But, Pat Benatar was holding it down. Yeah, she had her band behind her, or whatever musician she chose to be on the records, or, if they were the same people on the record as the ones that were on tour with her. But the name was solely Pat Benatar. It wasn't Pat Benatar and, insert band name here. It was her holding it down. She was the central focus. She was the one on those album covers. So, it, like I said, there's so many controversial choices. And this is the thing, like I said, for me personally, just campaigning the time for 2021 or 22, 23, whatever it takes to get them in there. They're just as deserving as well. So, but these are sort of the controversies you run across. And like I said, for those where it's like, well, Prince did everything, but again, there's categories to which that band qualifies. Because, yeah, Prince wrote all the songs, but Morris Day did play the drums on about 90% of those tracks. Certain members of the time did play on some of the songs on those albums. But the most important part is that they went out there and interpreted those songs on stage, even beyond Prince's dreams or, what he could imagine. And there's a category to which the time could qualify on, even just on that level alone. We all know Prince did everything, played all the other instruments, wrote, the majority of the songs and things like that. That's a given. But you can't ignore, this wasn't just some group of guys he stuck together. The Monkees are a little different because it started off to where at least two of them could play the instruments, and at least most of them could sing on that level. But the time are not the Monkees in that regard. They were all of them were top-notch musicians in their own right. And like I said, they took Prince's material and elevated it to such a degree that was just as influential being part of that thing, where, like, we'll take George Clinton. We know George Clinton is the center of Parliament Funkadelic, but there was Bootsy, there was Bernie Worrell, there's Eddie Hazel. So when their induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you had the Mob, the P-Funk, you had the Bomb up in there receiving that same award. And if you don't believe me, go on YouTube, and even Prince is there inducting those cats into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So, so there's no way you could say, well, George Clinton did everything. Well, he was the centerpiece. He was the mastermind. But there would be no Funkadelic. There would be no Parliament. There would be no Bootsy's Rubber Band without those other key pieces there in the, whether it was in the studio or on the stage. So, like I said, there's that same argument that could be meant for the time. But, like I said, seek out the Amari Purple Talk, campaign for the time being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's a special edition podcast you can find on YouTube. It's also wherever you're listening to this program on. By all means, check it out. This is my end of my rant about the Hall of Fame. Like I said, I'll continue to cover this as we get closer to, I guess, the broadcast date for the ceremony. I'm still going to continue to campaign for the time, still continue to educate you on how this Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing works and why it's not a perfect system. And like I said, it's not just for my favorite band, your favorite band as well. There's Facebook pages. There's every funk band that you can name that were even, say, more influential than the time that have not been inducted. And I mean groups or individuals that have been around since the 60s and 70s that still are not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to this day. And me campaigning for the time, just because it's my favorite group, like I said, it opens the door for your favorite group or anybody's favorite group or artist or whoever. So, let this be an inspiration. So whoever your favorite artist is, go out and let these people know, hey, they're just as influential. Or let them know that, hey, we know y'all doing this for whatever ratings or whatever, but for every 2 or 3 names that you feel are going to fill those seats in the banquet hall and get people to tune in, then just have the opposite. Just have some balance, get some people in there that deserve to be in there. So let me know what you guys think. Leave me a comment. And like I said, we will continue covering this Hall of Fame thing on this show for a while. So stay tuned, Purple listeners. And we're going to end our rant topic. And we're going to move on to our next topic, which is Prince, guitar hero and rock legend. The reason I put this in here, just to give equal time to the fact that, yes, Prince was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2004. Mostly everybody in the Prince community is already aware of that. They viewed the program on VH1, where, to me, it's one of the best performances. And I'm just starting with just his opening set, because he basically opened the program. Little mini concert, little mini sneak preview of what we were going to get with the musicology tour. It was one of those little marketing things that says, even though we felt he never really went away, but to the sort of mainstream, I only have Purple Rain in my record collection crowd, he was back. He was back. That to me, it was like the mini Elvis 68 comeback performance type energy with that. Also in that same program, George Harrison was also inducted as a solo artist. Of course, the Beatles, many years before, were inducted, as the band, the Beatles. But George Harrison's turn was next. I think John Lennon was before him. And I don't remember when Paul McCartney was put in. I know Ringo was sort of the last to be inducted, and that was just within the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years, he was in there. But the same year that Prince was inducted, George Harrison was inducted. And of course, again, most of us that have already seen it, the tribute to George Harrison performance, where, it was mostly, George's kind of crew, or, George people, whether he's worked with them or people that were around. I know Steve Winwood was on keyboards. Definitely Tom Petty, somebody that George has worked with. Tom Lynn. Oh no, I'm sorry, Jeff Lynne of ELO, Electric Light Orchestra, produced a lot of George's material in the 80s, as well as producing the Beatles' comeback singles, Free as a Bird and Real Love. And of course, so those were obvious choices to get up there and pay tribute to George. And George's son, Danny Harrison, was on stage as well. And they were doing While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And there you had Prince in there. And, I love the original Beatles recorded version. And on that record, on the White Album, it's Eric Clapton playing the guitar solos. So you have, I don't know who the guitar player was during the first solo, playing it almost note for note the way Eric Clapton did it. But the second guitar solo, which kind of takes you through the end of the song, Prince put his spin on it. And to me, that's one of the most legendary guitar moments for Prince in, one of the ones where I'm like, my top 5 favorite Prince guitar moments. That's definitely one of them. And I mean, he, did it in honor of George. His son was there on stage with him, and he did it for him to put a smile on his face. Because, George had been, he had been dead for a few years at that point. He died in 2001. So, so it was a good gesture. But I mean, basically in the process of, putting a smile on a kid's face, he's putting his stamp on, like, yeah, these cats are cool. Yeah, they did this for rock. And again, snubbing the nose at the sort of, like I said, these sort of classic rock snobs. It's like, it's only, whoever it is, whether it's only the ones that matter are Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page. And, as we'll get into the next segment later, but, Jimi Hendrix is not the only black person that can slay a guitar. I mean, he's done some stuff that nobody can do even to this day. But, there's definitely some brothers in some funk bands. Like I said, there was Eddie Hazel at one point, but there's some cats that can slay a guitar, and Prince is definitely one of them. And, it's unfortunate just because of the big void that's left in his absence. That vacuum is like, now we're just kind of going back and appreciating certain things. But also, too, I think because there was so much output, there was so much image that sort of got in the way of this guy really being, not necessarily copying Jimi Hendrix, but being mentioned in the same breath beyond our personal opinions and beyond the occasional rock critic. There's, like I said, there's, I think, elements of that classic rock crowd that, whatever they listen to, they only listen to Van Halen or they only listen to Metallica. And like I said, they'll give Jimmy his props, but that's the only one they're going to let in to that mindset. Or it's like, oh, Purple Rain was great, but no, it's kind of like that movie where it's like, you're not, you're only hearing Jimmy. You got to listen to Jimmy. That type of thing. It's like same with Prince. It's like you just can't hear Prince. You got to listen. Just listen to Prince. And to me, yeah, there's so many guitar moments. It'd be too many to name for this particular program, but definitely the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the While My Guitar Gently Weeps performance, that's one of my favorites. The Syracuse, the Purple Rain show, the one that was the video, released on home video, and now is part of the Purple Rain Deluxe Edition. That live rendition of Purple Rain is my favorite. Especially that real extended guitar solo introduction. That's one of my favorites. Purple Rain from Musicology, that's a favorite. Any guitar solo from that tour, Musicology tour, that's my favorite guitar moment. Joy and Repetition, the It Ain't Over disc on the One Night Alone set. So I mean, there's so many different examples of just guitar prowess. Just earlier today, just had a friend stop by and played him a couple of tracks from the 1999 Super Deluxe, and there was one, Rearrange, which is one of my favorite tracks off of the Vault stuff, and where it dives into that sort of guitar, sort of like the end of Private Joy into Ronnie Talks to Russia style, just total distortion. And again, like I said, there's so many different moments where, like I said, obviously he deserved his place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I was almost amazed that it did happen that soon. As soon as it did, I thought it would have taken a lot longer. Just like I said, just because of the different controversies surrounding the inductions or even the nomination process. But it's good that he's in there. But I think the next step, and like I said, it's unfortunate because of the absence, that we're now taking a look and go like, oh yeah, or kind of just letting people know, yeah, this guy was really, really just great at guitar, and just not take it for granted. And like I said, in the echelons of Jimi Hendrix or Eddie Hazel, Ernie Isley, he should really kind of be mentioned in that same breath. That we kind of go ooh and I anyway, but but like I said, just to kind of bring his name up in those circles, or those fan pages of funk and rock and that type of thing, just get his guitar playing in there. Even he himself, just wanted to remind the world of that, because the unreleased Undertaker CD, that was a power trio, just kicking it out, just doing what a power trio does, and that's just straight unadulterated rock, heavy guitar rock. And he wanted to put that and give that away for free in a guitar magazine, and Warner Brothers said no. And I think really I think the estate should release that CD, release it for free in an issue of whatever, Guitar World, Guitar Player, any guitar trade magazine, and then maybe a month later, release it to the masses on CD and vinyl. But really just kind of remind the world just how great this cat was. Like I said, again, mentioned him in the breath of a Hendrix or Santana, and like I said, it's not just this image or all the other controversies that surrounded his career. Like, this guy was a true musician. I think even transcends the title of true musicianship. It was a force of nature. Like a lot of our legends, whether there's some still with us or some that aren't even around anymore, but those forces of nature that we were fortunate enough to exist in the same time frame, to witness unfold in real time. So again, like I said, just kind of wanted to acknowledge that I guess this is almost a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame special of Amari Purple Talk, but just to kind of have that balance, to say, like I said, give you guys a little education on Rock Hall and its issues, but also acknowledge the times that they've gotten it right, and this is definitely one of them. Like I said, a lot of the classic artists that I listen to and like are already in there, but there's a lot more that deserve that time. So, like I said, just acknowledging Prince's place as a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer. And we talked about the bass the previous episode, so we switched it up to guitar on this one to give that equal time as well. But like I said, share your thoughts with me on your memories of Prince as a rock legend. What songs, what tracks. Again, I've done flashback on Chaos and Disorder. That's another. Again, there's so many examples, but as far as definitive example, that's definitely one you should check out if you don't have that in your collection. It's just been re-released since September of last year, so check that out. But again, share your thoughts with me about, like I said, some of your favorite guitar moments with Prince. Or, did you see the performance of the Hall of Fame? Memories of 2004? Or was this something that you guys just discovered recently? So share those thoughts with me. And then we're going to end that topic and we're going to move on to the next one. And our next topic is, who says a funk band can't play rock? All right, so like I said, we should have really called this our Rock and Roll Hall of Fame special edition. But again, this is just a reminder of my campaign for the time being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But how I got to this title. On Funkadelic's One Nation Under a Groove album, it is the third song. If you have the vinyl, it's on side A. If you have the CD, it's track number 3. And that is the title of the song. And it's basically, who says a funk band can't play rock? And I remember listening to like, that is a bold statement, because it's not, I don't know, I wasn't as familiar with the Funkadelic's Westbound era material as much as I am now. I had a friend back in grade school. Now, he had some of the Westbound stuff, like Cosmic Slop. He played that album for me, so I kind of got it at that point. But the One Nation Under Groove album was the first Funkadelic album that I actually had. So I wasn't as familiar with it. So, as I knew all the Parliament stuff, and that stuff is just basically pure, unadulterated, kind of, I wouldn't say James Brownish, but it's more that sort of, Soul Train type of, dance, funk, because it just had the horns to it. The horns kind of gave it that sort of flavor, that dance flavor, where Funkadelic was more like the heavy guitar stuff. But the heavier guitar stuff was before they signed with Warner Brothers. So I wasn't as familiar with the Westbound. So, already into One Nation. And even the next song after that, which is Groove Allegiance, it's just kind of like, it's real laid back kind of funk. One of my favorite bass lines, period, is in that particular song. So when it gets to track 3, to me at that time, it just took such a left turn, because it was like they were straight rocking. It was like, who said, and it just goes, who says the funk band can't play rock music? Who, it's like, it was like, wow, that is a bold statement. And I don't know. I mean, I guess you kind of wonder where a lot of these songs come from. And I'm just thinking to myself that these guys must have got dissed so much or criticized so much, about having guitars in their music or something, like, oh, you guys aren't a rock, but how dare you play rock and that type of thing, that this was their statement. This is like, well, who says? Because we can show enough play some funk, or, just watch us dance, just amazing. So anyway, but that's how I got to the title for this segment. But to me, the time also fit in that category. Because remember, yes, again, going to hear, Prince did everything. And we know. He wrote all the songs. This was his concept. Him and Morris Day sat down and worked this out. And like I said, Morris played most of the drums. But yeah, Prince came up with the songs. But let's put it this way. Yes, this was Prince's sort of agenda. Because, number one, he himself did not want to be pigeonholed as just a R&B act. He was so versatile. And, given the environment in Minneapolis, which is unlike the environment here, we've always had 3 or 4 black radio stations that went, 24 hours, 7 days a week, and, the rest or whatever, there's a few rock stations here. So we kind of have that sort of little bit of a melting pot here, where, in Minneapolis you did, but their black radio was only one black radio station, and they were only limited to so many hours during the day. And I think it was even an AM station. Here we had AM stations, about 2 or 3 black radio stations on the AM dial once upon a time in the good old 70s, folks. And then by the mid to late 70s, we had a couple of black radio stations on FM. So we got a little bit of everything, with that. But with them, so they had more, Grand Funk Railroad influence. They had more Chicago influence. They had more, Beatles, Pink Floyd, Rolling Stones, David Bowie kind of creeping in. They had their Parliament Funkadelic and James Brown when they could get it. But, like I said, he himself did not want to be pigeonholed because of those primary influences. Now, it would have been probably different if he grew up in a New York or LA or Chicago or St. Louis. The influence might have been a little bit different, or it may have leaned more towards the funk than anything else. But in Minneapolis, you're product of that environment, and all those cats were equally influenced by different genres. So that was part of his agenda. It's just that at the time he wanted to lean heavily more towards the R&B, the funk. But at the same time, you also had this element. There was a band. They didn't play funk, and they really didn't necessarily play new wave. I can't really tell you what they played. I don't know. It's kind of more like, they were more like, to me, like a black version of Sha Na Na. And for those who don't know who Sha Na Na was, they were these cats like in the late 60s and definitely in the 70s. They kind of had like this 50s thing. It was like a, not really a satire, I don't know, maybe kind of a satire, or it ended up being a satire or a parody. They even had their own TV show for a little while. And basically what they just did, they just basically is, a bunch of white guys with the ducktail 50s haircuts and the greaser look and all that. And they were just singing doo-wop songs. They were just doing covers of 50 songs and stuff. But there was a black group called the Bus Boys. Like I said, shoot, I don't even think I had any of their records really. Um, they had a hit song on the soundtrack of 48 Hours. I think that's about as big as they got, I think. But it was sort of like, to me, like the black version of that, where it was like this sort of like 50s style music, so to speak. So, that was sort of the thing. And then it was kind of mixed in, where I'm going with this, it was kind of mixed in with new wave and the punk thing that was sort of happening as in the late 70s and early 80s. So, kind of piggybacking off of maybe that Busboys influence, or I don't even think they were influenced to say, but kind of from my perspective, where you kind of had these groups kind of maybe not sort of, like I said, funk wise, but kind of leaning more towards that 50s look, so to speak, with the baggy pants and the zoot suits and the 50s style of clothing and all that with that. But, like I said, the time was definitely a funk unit, but Prince put a lot of, like after high school, that was straight new wave. And, like I said, some of us were listening to the Cars and some of us were listening to Devo, and we were kind of aware of that. Like I said, for me, on a, prior to being 16 or 17, when you're 13, 14, 15, you don't have a car and you're really not able to get out, and you really couldn't go out anywhere on a Saturday night or out late on a Saturday night. You get to stay up a little bit later. But yeah, for me it was, like I said, Eddie Murphy era Saturday Night Live, then switch over to Channel 11 and watch the Three Stooges, and they would show Three Stooges shorts for like about an hour and a half. And then right after that was Don Kirshner's rock concert. So, got Stones and, again, the Cars. But, there was also, Heat Wave was on performing, and, Shalimar, stuff like that. But anyway, like the new wave groups, the Police, the Cars, that type of thing. So listening to something like After High School, we got it. We understood what was going on with that. And then later there was, what was that, Kid Creole and the Coconuts? Because there was some kids that were, back then, were like, oh yeah, they're better than the time. There's always that sort of thing that's just a little bit more underground than, what you thought was kind of like your own little underground band. With that, and of course that underground band was always better. Just kind of the same thing, like, there were people like, oh, Fishbone is better than the time, and they're great. I love a lot of Fishbone too, but those type of groups, were kind of coming to the forefront. And basically on a Time album, you had a couple of those songs that was sort of like either knocking it, sort of like, One Day I'm Gonna Be Somebody, and that tag at the end, we don't like new wave, but damn, that song was harder new wave than most new wave. So there you have it. But that's the thing. That band had an influence on, it sort of opened that door for a Kid Creole to get noticed. Whether it was 6 months later or a year later, because like I said, by 81 we only had the Time. By 82 you had the Time second album, and then from my point of view, with those little rumblings of hearing about a Kid Creole and the Coconuts and hearing about Fishbone and all that other stuff. So, what else is there? I mean, you had, even going back to the 70s, you had the Isley Brothers and Ernie Isley. Now, legend, or the urban legend, was because Jimi Hendrix used to play guitar for the Isley Brothers back in the mid 60s, before Jimmy got famous on his own. Yeah, but anyway, that was the urban legend that Jimmy was staying at the Isley Brothers' home, and he actually taught a young Ernie Isley how to play guitar. Now I don't know if that's the truth or not, but definitely Hendrix was a definite influence on what Ernie Isley was doing and stuff. And I mean that's again influential. Carlos Santana. I mean just amazing work, and that stuff is was just as soulful. But then again, like I said, your rock people were into those early Santana records and stuff. And then again, like I said, there's Jimmy, Eddie Hazel. Again, just dive into that Westbound era funkadelic, and like I said, it's like, well, who says, because they're bringing it. I remember I was working at a photo lab. I was sort of a I wouldn't say manager or anything, but it was like I definitely was in charge of producing all the processing the film and doing the prints and all that. And if the machines broke, then if I couldn't fix it, I always had to call the guy to fix it, sort of thing. And like I said, I had two people that they ran the store or whatever. That manager and assistant manager that I answered to. But there was also a guy that they brought in from one of the other branches. And I think because sometimes you get that volume that's high and you need backup. So I think they just called this guy in as backup, whatever. So I don't know. Somehow we got the idea of, bringing the boom box in, bring our tapes in. And, it's a white guy. And, I brought some of my Westbound era funkadelic, because it's like, you might like it. It's got, hey, guitar, And, the thing was I played it, or I was playing it, and he shows up and he's like, oh, what the hell is this, stuff, And I'm like, it's funkadelic, it's like, you don't know funkadelic? It's like, had no earthly clue. And it's like, dude, they're doing no different than, whatever, Pink Floyd or whoever, and again, there's the blues and, all these groups, whether it's Led Zeppelin, whether it's the Rolling Stones, it's like, it basically, long story short, it was an argument that he just could not possibly win because, history, it's right there. It's like, there'd be no Rolling Stones, there'd be no Led Zeppelin if there was no Muddy Waters, if there was no B.B. King. So, like I said, again, bringing it all back to the present, and again, like I said, these sort of arguments that need to go away. Who says a funk band can't play rock? And then to, it's like, well, yeah, hip hop has its own Hall of Fame. I don't know if there is a funk Hall of Fame. Maybe there needs to be one. But the bottom line is that once upon a time, I don't care what you were playing, if you were of a certain age in the 50s and 60s, and maybe just the early, 70, 71, 72, to middle-aged and older people, it was all rock and roll, and it was all noise to them. Just kind of like now, what's passing is music now. And again, I'm trying not to be one of those like, oh, well, my music was back when whatever. There's a lot of things that did get lost. There's a lot of things that this industry has allowed to happen to where I think at the end of the day, regardless of, but like I said, there's things that the Beatles did that, even older people accepted and got into after a certain point. But there's a lot of musicianship that has gone away due to the advancements of, I'll say, AI at this particular point. The voice as an instrument, barely matters unless you go on one of these shows. And even if whether you win or lose the show, you fade off into obscurity because it's like, well, your voice doesn't lend itself to what these computers are having these people pass as, artists these days. Here I'm doing it again. But I mean, some things do have its merit and some things do have its place in the sun, and some of it works when it works. But like I said, as far as those arguments still need to go away in favor of it's good and it should be recognized as being good. And we can be negative about it all day, every day. But, when it comes to this, like I said, these sort of people that have an idea of what rock and roll is or what it should be, then they're getting it all wrong because, what you were listening to at whatever, whenever it started happening for you, whether it was in 1972 or 73, or, whether it was a Led Zeppelin album or a Pink Floyd album, that's not what music was sounding like in the 50s. And it dang sure wasn't what the Beatles were sounding like on I Want to Hold Your Hand or She Loves You, and, there's snobs that, dismiss that. There's people that love the Beatles from first note to last note. Just like there are those of us that love Prince from first note to last note as well. But there's people that dismiss the first half of their, catalog and feel like, oh, no, Beatles didn't start happening until Sgt. Pepper and, on. And that's what they gravitate towards. But, like I said, it that wasn't the case, in the, late 50s and early 60s. It was just rock music. And let's just bring it down to the level of, since from that was the sort of Big Bang that's expanded the universe into what we have now. It was just music, and it was universally loved. Like I said, the Motown stuff included. That's universally loved. It was basically the sound of a young America, and that's just basically what it should just come down to. It's not that it should be this genre or that genre, or if a band is known for just doing whatever, because again, some of that stuff on Pet Sounds, or a song like When I'm 64 or Penny Lane or something like that, it's not necessarily, there's a clip of even kids on Bandstand not like, Strawberry Fields Forever. What is this? This is, I can't dance to that. But, it's about the experience that you get out of it, and not at the expense of people that just want to gravitate towards something different. And like I said, this should all be acknowledged. And at one point, whether you were black or white, this was all rock and roll. And, whether you're Temptations or Whitney Houston, you've earned that right to be there. And again, like I said, we should all just embrace it. So, but, what do you think? Who says the funk band can't play rock? Well, I say a funk band can play rock, and they can play jazz, they can play blues, they can even do classical music. Oh yeah, you rock snobs again, some of those, metal guitarists, classical music was the influence on a lot of that. A lot of those notes, that's some Stravinsky that's happening in there as well. So, who says a rock band can't play classical music at all? But it's, like the song says, it's still rock and roll to me. And it's still funky to me too. So, let me know what you guys think. What are your comments? Like I said, this seems to have been the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it seems like we're pointing out more of the hypocrisy, and we're pointing out, the controversies of this honor. And like I said, a lot of our favorites are already there, so we're good on that. But again, there's also a lot of people that get overlooked that deserve to be in there, that have worked hard, a lot of, happy stories, a lot of sad stories too. Artists, groups, that have given everything, for those few minutes on a record for us to enjoy, that has made a tremendous amount of difference in our lives as well, that we feel they should be recognized for their hard work and effort as well. So let me know what you guys think about that as well. And we're going to end that topic. We're going to move on to our very final topic today. And that is, I officially, as of today, have 1,000, at this point, over 1,000 unique downloads, thanks to the Liberated Syndication Network, or Libsyn for short. And just want to express my thank yous to everybody around the world that has been tuning in since the last week of August of 2019. Like I said, still few countries on the planet. Hopefully, spread the word out there, folks. Let's get some of those countries in there. I want to welcome two of the newest countries that have been tuning in, or at least started tuning in this week. So to the people of Nairobi, just want to say Sasa. Hope I'm saying that right. Sasa or Sasasa. And also to the people of Senegal, just want to say Salam Alaikum to everyone out there. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you guys are enjoying the show. And again, thanks to everyone else around the world, United States, Michigan. You guys showed up. Again, it's Prince. Y'all show up first every single time. So, hey, Detroit, what's happening? Like I said, United States, Canada, Europe, of course, Great Britain, Spain, France. You guys have been representing every week. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to the people on Facebook. Thanks to people on Twitter, Instagram. Everybody that's played a part in this milestone. So we're going to keep it going. Also, too, February will be the launch of the Amari Funksoloist Hour, and that is going to be a podcast devoted to all of the elements of the funk, from James Brown, Sly and the Family Stone, Cameo, Ohio Players. Insert your favorite funk band here. So I'll give you the official release date as I figure it out, but it'll be definitely in February. So again, like I said, thank you guys very much. I'm having a great time doing this show every week. Also, too, guys supporting the show, there's Amari Purple Talk t-shirts available. There are Amari Purple Talk drinking mugs that are available for sale. The links to that are in the show notes, so be able to check out your show notes and click on those links to access either me on social media or to purchase some Amari Purple Talk merchandise, because that will help me even do more of these podcasts. It's a labor of love. It's hard work, but I enjoy doing it every single week, and it's not going to stop. Or as I say in my song, Listen to the Band, 21st Century, and it ain't going to stop. So once again, thank you, thank you, thank you. And now we're going to move on to our Purple Spotlight. And basically that is a segment that highlights a Prince album, film, video, or an associated artist. And today's Purple Spotlight is Jill Jones. So ever since I started this podcast, there were certain associated artists that I definitely wanted to spotlight. And this year, finally getting around to doing that. So we've had, of course, Vanity was the first one. But I definitely wanted to include Andre Simone. I definitely wanted to include Jill Jones in this as well. Because basically, like I said, there's sort of a void with Prince's absence, and with that void, as I'll say human beings tend to do, is sort of maybe attempt to rewrite history, so to speak. But there are people out there like Andre Simone, there's Morris Day, there's Jill Jones, that and others. We're going to get around to them as well in the coming weeks. But these are definitely people that help keep things in its proper perspective, that I feel. And she's definitely one of those individuals. I first heard the name because basically I got into Tina Marie and Prince exactly the same day. There was a friend of mine lived down the block. I had a pretty decent component set. I was about 15 at the time. Got it as a Christmas present. And he would borrow albums from other people, bring them to my house, make tapes, and then return the albums. And then this one particular day, he brought Prince's Dirty Mind album and Tina Marie's Irons in the Fire album. So based on those, I became a fan of both of them on the same day. So we kind of fast forward, so I'm 15. So fast forward a few months later, so Square Biz is out as a single. And not long after that, the It Must Be Magic album was released. So since, like I said, became a fan right away. So that was the first Tina Marie album that I bought. So, because my friend left the tape that he made over. So that allowed me to listen to Prince deeper. So that converted me into a fan on that listen. But before then, I listened to the Tina Marie side of the tape and was like, oh, okay, this is great. So I think I made a dub of that album, but I bought the It Must Be Magic album once it came out. So, of course, like I said, I'm a liner note junkie. Even back then, I was a liner note junkie. So, there's a song that says, a couple of the songs, JJ was the backing vocalist. And there's also a song on that album, The Ballad of Cradle Rob and Me, to which Jill Jones has a co-writing credit on that. So that's basically my gateway into the world of Jill Jones, based from that Tina Marie album there. So we kind of fast forward to 1999 era, and as I purchased the 1999 album and reading the liner notes, well, there's a JJ that's there. I was like, oh, I wonder if it's the same person. And of course, I think not long after that, there's the 1999 video, and we're all like, man, who is that? Oh, that's oh, wow, okay, that's what she looks like. Perfect. And, so connecting those dots, I was like, okay, well, I figured that she was like a background singer, because if you guys check out, she's not in this, by the way, but if you check out a documentary, if you haven't seen it already, 20 Feet from Stardom, which is a documentary on background vocalists. And you notice a lot of background vocalists get a lot of work. So if, again, liner note junkies like myself, if you read the liner notes, a lot of times for background vocalists back in the day, way back when, folks, you'd see different names, you'd see the same names on different albums sometimes, like as the background vocalist. So, there, back in those days, there was a lot of work that you could get, just like being a studio musician. If you're a drummer, read certain session drummers you'd see on different albums, or bass players, guitar players, whatever, horn players, background singers were the same. So I figured like, oh, well, she's getting a lot of background vocal work, but somehow that morphed into becoming a sort of Prince protege. And especially, I think we even more took notice because of her small part in the film Purple Rain as well. We all sort of, felt sorry for her unrequited love of Prince because he was chasing Apollonia all through the film in that. So, we sort of felt like, oh, felt kind of sympathetic, for her in that one. So fast forward again to around 1987, and that was a pretty interesting year, just in addition to the Sign of the Times album being released, but two albums just sort of like snuck in under the radar, like you go into, like, a friend of mine, he was in the record store and just stumbled upon the first Madhouse album, because it wasn't a lot of fanfare. It was just something that popped up one day. And, we all know that history and the mystery surrounding it. So it was that, well, okay, it says Paisley Park, blah, 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 blah. But the next sort of surprise was the Jill Jones album on Paisley Park. Now, there was, what we didn't realize at the time was that the length of time that it took to record that album, because I think a lot of it was started around 83, 84. Or at least we know now a lot of the tracks for it were recorded that sort of 83, 84 period. But we knew, like, okay, well, we know who she is. Okay, so that's great. She's got her own album. Well, we know she can sing, so that's great too. And then again, looking at the liner notes, she has the co-writing credit. So I'm thinking like, well, she did co-write the Ballad of Cradle Rob and Me, so we know she can write songs. Great. So, we all sort of fell in love with this album because we thought she kind of had a hand in writing the lyrics. And those are some damn good set of lyrics, from Baby Your Trip to All Day, All Night, For Love, those tracks. It was like, wow, so we sort of bought into, and I guess that was the thing that Prince was going for, instead of like just having his name attached to where, it's like, oh, it's him again, to where it's sort of that sort of giving credit, even though they didn't have anything to do with a lot of the lyrics, so to speak, or even a lot of the music, so to speak. It kind of takes that mystery off of him. So if it sinks or swims, it's, it sinks or swims on that merit of the artist, and it doesn't really reflect on him, even though by 1987 we're all sort of hip to the game at this point, like, oh, well, he's doing a little bit more. But with this album, like I said, we really, really bought into the lyrics. in those songs, because we thought she wrote them. So now, years later, we know like, oh, well, he was writing that or whatever. Now, again, too, there's a lot coming out to where she did have a lot of input in certain other songs as well. So now, one of my favorite things, if you seek out a lot of interviews with her on the other podcast shows, just great, insightful, truthful, interviews regarding that. And also, too, there's some instances, she's defending her place in this history as well, because, again, when you sort of have this sort of void, there tends to be a lot of revisionist history. And also, too, there's a lot of people that want to write certain people out of the narrative as well. So definitely a champion of standing up for herself in regards to, what her place in, the Prince musical singularity is. So, but really kind of that sort of mystique, almost a bit of a letdown now. I mean, it doesn't matter now, but I think 21-year-old me would have been crushed in 1987. It's like, oh, she didn't write that. But now it's still great. It's still a great album to listen to. But beyond the Prince association, like I said, check out a lot of interviews on the other podcast shows where she's being interviewed. She really keeps you up to date on what she's working on now, which is, I think, like a computer company or software type company or website business. Not related to music as much, but there's also songs that she's done beyond Prince too. And that's the other thing that I want to highlight as well, that there are a lot of these associated artists that, like I said, they're artists in their own right. It's just that, like I said, Prince recognized something in them and opened that door, gave them the opportunity or the platform or even the launching pad. And even when a lot of these people left the fold, in their own way, on their own level, was able to parlay that into a level of success. Now, the big misconception to a lot of people is that success means, oh, your album is number one, or your single is number one, or you done sold 8 billion copies or whatever. And sometimes success isn't necessarily the case. Or even if a record falls short, doesn't mean that it's still not good. So, like I said, what I want to do with this particular segment is basically, like I said, in addition to highlighting what was going on in the Prince musical singularity, but, if these people are still around today, then, there's a lot of things you should check out as well. So in addition to the self-titled album from 1987 on Paisley Park, there was going to be a follow-up, but they sort of, her and Prince sort of fell out before that album could be completed. There are a couple of tracks in circulation, and I do think there is a music video for one. And I think it was called Boom Boom, Can You Feel the Beat of My Heart was the track. But I want to call attention to what she's been doing since, at least musically. There was an album called thew that was in 2001. Let's see, there was an album called Wasted that was released in 2004. And an album called I Am that was released in 2016. Let's see. So thew and Wasted I've heard. And it's not the Minneapolis sound. So, if you're only into it for that, then then you're missing out. Because like I said, these are, she's expressing herself. This is her voice. This is the style that she wants to put forth, and it's they're two great pieces of work. So I would recommend checking out those two. Now I haven't heard I Am. Now there is a single called I Miss You, which was a tribute to Prince, which was written and recorded after his passing. So this was a tribute song to him. Now I did hear that, and that is a beautiful piece of work. It's hard for me to listen to because of what it's associated with. It's one of those things that's so beautiful you can't listen to it. So, but I have, when it was first released, I've heard it. I did purchase the single, so so I would recommend. This is one probably most recent item I would recommend listening to. It does have some of the Minneapolis elements in it, because it is a tribute, but it's definitely a beautiful piece of work. But I have not heard, if this is on that I Am album, I have not heard that album in its entirety, so that's something I'm going to definitely look for and check out. But definitely, excuse me, definitely check out thew and check out Wasted as well. Like I said, it's good music. It's good indie music. And like I said, she's still consistent in delivering good quality work as an artist as well. So by all means, seek those projects out. Let's see what else we have here. Yeah, and there's been some singles as well, looks like, too. Looks like I have to check these out as well. There was Living for the Weekend in 2009. I think I might have heard that one. And then This Is How It Feels from 2014. So I've missed out on those. And then there was a Forbidden Love from 2015. So I myself have to do some catching up here. But like I said, if you don't have her self-titled Paisley Park album, definitely get that. That is actually one of my favorite associated artist albums. If I have a top 5 or anything, that's definitely in my top 5. Like I said, 1987 for me was a very good year musically, especially in the whole Prince musical Singularity. Sign of the Times is my favorite album. This was an album I had in heavy rotation. Madhouse 8, Madhouse 16 came out later that year. So, what was that? The third Sheila E. album was out as well. So, I mean, the Paisley Park was hidden. It had a couple of other things. Oh, Taja Seville, was that? I think that was 1987 also. That's one I don't have. I know other people that have it and listen to it through them. But, that was when Paisley Park was doing what Paisley Park was supposed to have been doing. Good quality work. I think because of the time frame that it took to record that first Paisley Park album, that it was just as much as I enjoyed it and as much as a lot of people enjoyed that album, as far as it being successful, I think it was just a couple of years too late. I think if it came out like 85, maybe even 86, I think it would have been a lot bigger. Yeah, but it's still an enjoyable album to listen to. There were the extended versions also, like G-Spot for Love. The B-side to Mia Boca, which is 77 Bleecker Street, is probably my deeper favorite B-side of hers. In fact, I have a song called Save Yourself, to which I pinched that vocal arrangement from 77 Bleecker Street. Pinched that for my track with that. Even I did ask permission for it, and I guess she did say yes. And I guess because it hasn't sold 1 million copies or anything, the lawyers aren't knocking on the door or anything. But like I said, it was just I just love that track so much. The music. I couldn't really pinch the music. I just had a different original groove. But when I was writing the lyrics to it, then I kind of had that in my head as I was writing the lyrics and stuff. So just that arrangement. And it worked for then when I recorded it, but I don't know. I have to re-listen to it again. But definitely 77 Bleecker Street, definitely one of my favorite B-sides from her. The G-Spot extended version, the B-side Baby Cries, Aya. To me, both of those songs should have been on the album itself. And I don't know, again, maybe that would have taken it to a different plane or whatever. But definitely 2 great B-sides to get into. Seek those out. These are only available on vinyl. You can still get the album on vinyl. CD is harder to track down, so I'm hoping one day the estate, when it comes to a lot of the associated artists, decides to reissue a lot of those classic Paisley Park albums as well, because they are, just as important to the legend as a lot of the classic Prince material is. But like I said, definitely this is, well, I put it this way. Right now I'm still in the learning stage of this, or the growing stage of the whole podcast world. So I'm not really in a position where I feel comfortable doing interviews yet, and B, it's a matter of having the time to really try to organize that and put it together and set that up. But never say never. Maybe at some point down the road I'll do that. But this is definitely one of 3 people within the Prince musical singularity that I definitely would love to interview one day. But also too, because everyone else has done it, I want to do it differently. So, like I said, who knows? One day for sure. But again, like I said, with the Purple Spotlight, it's kind of giving at least a little shine to these people. And like I said, they're still doing stuff. They're still active. And what's most important, they're still around. And check these people out while they're here, folks. So by all means, seek out any of her recorded output, whether it's on Paisley Park or not on Paisley Park. Check it out. Get into it. You'll definitely enjoy it. And also let me know, is this also one of your favorite associated acts? Leave me a comment and let me know. And then we're going to move on to the last thing of the day, and that is our Bite the Boot segment. And our Bite the Boot segment, it's a segment that highlights a circulating bootleg or vault recording or video for consideration for an official release by the estate. And today's Bite the Boot selection is Dream Factory. All right, so the Dream Factory. All right, it is an unreleased double LP. That's vinyl to you and me, folks. And it was done by Prince and the Revolution. All right, so what's most noticeable about this particular album is that, again, this is synonymous with the Camille album, Sign of the Times album, because some of the tracks Ballad of Dorothy Parker, Starfish and Coffee. Those songs did end up on the Dream Factory. It's gone through a lot of different track variations or sequencing, as it's actually known in the business. But let's see, there was Teacher Teacher, which actually there's a earlier version that is on the 1999 Super Deluxe. Sexual Suicide, which actually ended up on Crystal Ball. The title track itself is on the Crystal Ball, and I'm talking the 1998 release, which was just covering unreleased tracks from 1986 through the 90s. In that, let's see what else. Like I said, Strange Relationship, Starfish and Coffee ended up on Sign of the Times. There was a configuration that had the song Last Heart. Movie Star. That was also, both of those were also on Crystal Ball. The song Crystal Ball itself was considered. It was also considered for the 1987 3 LP track sequencing, which ended up being the Sign of the Times album. So this is a very popular, favorite, holy grail acquisition for a lot of collectors. I've got one configuration. I really honestly couldn't tell you which one. Let's see, as I'm looking at the different configurations, I almost really can't tell the difference myself. But I do have one. I really haven't had a chance to listen to it from beginning to end. I've only gotten through maybe like 3 or 4 songs on it, and then have to continue the rest of the day. But again, like I said, this is very popular amongst the collectors that are out there. And something that should definitely be considered for, again, I guess, I don't know if it's on CD. Well, I guess it fits on one CD, but I guess if you put it on vinyl, it ends up being 2 albums. It ends up being a double album. So, yeah, there's a lot of... You can almost do a deluxe edition. Well, actually, this could almost be 2 CDs in itself, because there are songs here. I'm looking at one configuration, Power Fantastic, which was actually released on the hits and the B-sides. Let's see, there's the original version of Train, which was done by... or redone by Mavis Staples on her Paisley Park debut album. Prince's version is one that's still in the vault. Let's see, another popular one, All My Dreams. It's a really quirky song. I've heard that one popped up on some Parade outtakes at one point. So I don't know if you do a Parade Super Deluxe. I don't know if some of these songs are going to end up on that or not. But definitely for me, I would love to see this as a standalone release. Most of these tracks, again, will probably be divided up amongst a Parade Super Deluxe, and other tracks will probably end up on a Sign of the Times Super Deluxe, I'm sure. But again, you can get away with doing both. And I probably stated last week that at one point, box sets originally were sort of the commercial for the future re-release of an artist's entire catalog. I'm not sure how it's done nowadays. It may be the same way, or nowadays it's different. It's like, I know with the case of the Beatles, It's where you have the box set, then you can get just the CD. Well, same thing with the Super Deluxe. You could just get the CD or vinyl of just the remastered original album. Then there's a set that's the original album, maybe one disc of outtakes. You have more choices available. But I still think that you could get away with doing both. You can do a Super Deluxe set, and then you could just do a little standalone release. Again, the key would be the liner notes, keeping everything in its proper perspective. And, just have it as a selling point to where, again, there's people that really aren't fans of big, huge box sets of things. Or it could be a case of economics because, box sets can be pricey. But this is something that you can release as a single CD, and it's economically sound. You could probably make a little bit more money from it, I guess. But given, the history of what this was, I think this deserves a special release on its own, whether it's a single CD, given the different configurations, you can probably almost get away with 2 CDs with it. But if you can find it, I'm sure it's probably on YouTube somewhere. But like I said, this is one that definitely I would recommend the estate do an official standalone release, good liner notes with it, and just, again, get it into not only the fans of the collectors, but again, if you're new to the Prince musical singularity and there's the classic material and you want to start doing a deeper dive, this would be one of the things I would recommend. There's the Camille album. There's The Undertaker. There's a couple of live performances of things. But this is definitely one of the deeper dives. It's like if you're new to the Prince world and it's like, hey, what's something deeper I can check out? Dream Factory. Check it out. So, but what do you guys think? Do you think that's a good idea? Should it be a standalone release? Again, should it go on a Super Deluxe edition? Like I said, most of the tracks can end up on a Parade Super Deluxe. Other tracks can end up on a Sign of the Times Super Deluxe. So, do you want to wait in between Super Deluxe releases to get all of this good listening? Or do you want to have this released with a good liner note set that tells the history of this album and how it ended up not being released? Basically what did happen was that Prince broke up the Revolution, so that put this album on the shelf, and he took most of the songs that he liked from this, and some of it ended up being Sign of the Times. He wanted to return to that mode of where it was produced, written, arranged, and performed by Prince. He was the one-man band again, with the exception of a few things here and there. But definitely the revolution was no more. So, again, like I said, you want to have a single CD. This would have been, if anything, this would have been their last album as Prince and the Revolution, with having the Revolution's input on the song. So let me know what you guys think, and thank you for tuning in to this very long segment of Amari Purple Talk. Like I said, we covered a lot of ground, and thanks for putting up with my rant about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But it ain't over, folks. But we will definitely see you again next week. And as always, keep it purple and on the one.